Awesome, guys. Welcome back to Keystone. We are going into our second session. We're thankful to have you guys here and thankful for our sponsors for providing the opportunity to have almost a year worth of sessions. And thank you for viewing on social media platforms as well. Next, we have a presentation followed by our fireside chat with Jimmy Dunn with Schneider Electric.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, good evening, everybody. Once again, my name is Jimmy Dunn. I work for Schneider Electric. Anybody in the room ever heard of Schneider Electric over here? Okay. Yeah. So, we do everything from anywhere the residential side. You may go to your breaker box and see a little square D breaker. So we go anything as small as that to an outlet, all the way to power switchgear and making sure that the building that we're even in today is getting clean energy. Going forward, what we want to kind of focus on is the smart building concept. There's a lot of buzzwords going around, right? There's a lot of technology. There's a lot of innovation. There's a lot of software. There's just so much going on that we want to make sure that the way we look at buildings moving forward, you may hear words like sustainability, right? Net carbon zero, resiliency. And so when I was talking with Kevin and him and I got introduced a while back, he's like, Schneider's just actually we're the fourth largest sustainable company in the world. And so what are we doing that's driving the market to make sure that anything from a smart home to a smart hospital is being integrated and designed and connected correctly? And so just a little bit about myself. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. Lived there my whole life. And go Cardinals. I have no NFL fans anymore since the Rams left and went to LA. So we don't support we have the XFL, right? So we and being from St. Louis, I've grown up there in high school and college, and been in the HVAC industry for over 12 years. I've been in sales for 7 years and now have been working for Schneider Electric. My primary role is to work with MEP design firms and to partner with them to help support them in the smart building concept, and to come alongside of these partnerships, because that's what they truly are. I come into a lot of engineering firms where they're just like set in their ways. They have a standard. They don't want to move from there. They don't want to grow. They don't want to have conversations. That's totally fine with me. But we do hand select quite a bit of partnerships with engineering firms here in Kansas City, as well as in St. Louis. And I have a 7-state territory, which I try to go and evangelize the smart building concept. And so on the screen here, I just got a couple of slides just to prepare some conversations for us. Again, Schneider Electric's so huge, and I just recently heard that we're over 160 years business that has been around a long time. And so if you look at some of our history, we've been in the power side, and then eventually we grew into the HVAC side. So not just like your home thermostats, but we're talking sensors, actuators, large metering. We want to get in and try to make sure that large commercial properties and very complex solutions like maybe some labs, laboratory pharmaceutical spaces, as well as data centers are being as efficient and mission critical as possible. And now we're getting into what we call the software side. It was really interesting to hear from the first session all about the software and all about the growing of that industry and the sales as a service. And so we, as Schneider, also invest and also partner with other companies like PlanOn, Aviva, and a few others, AutoGrid, to make sure that we are a part of that growth process. And from the beginning of the thought process of a building, of what it's going to look like, all the way to the specification, to the design, to the construction, all the way until you get into the building, green and sustainable and ready to go. So we have a model at Schneider where we don't have as many branches on the construction process. We have about 18 branches, but we primarily work with our partners who are, I think the first session we talked about is those channel partnerships, right? And so we partner up with individual companies who are local, who know their markets, who know their customers, and they represent Schneider Electric on our equipment and manufacturing side. So they work on the building space, space, healthcare, data centers, and the life sciences to go in and we support them in the evangelism process of not just selling a product, not just trying to work on an air handling unit or a rooftop unit or a chiller, but we try to help them, give them tools to help their customers save in efficiency and energy and making a larger impact instead of just, I'm going to get it fixed. And so we try to help support them. We have over 150 factory certified partnerships all around the U.S. So you're going to hear a couple of terms from me moving forward. The bottom of our stack is what we call connected products. The simplest way I can do this is to say that's a wall thermostat. That's a sensor. That's a what we call inputs. It's kind of going in and out. Is that okay? Okay. So it's sensors, it's outputs. We're trying to tell something what to do. We're getting something in. And then as well as the edge control, which is the software proprietary, like on the computer, you can see the graphic screen. You can see what's going on. It's taking in the data. And then above that is where we get our apps and analytics services. So this is going beyond. I mean, we really truly care about the data that's in a building, because in order to make better and smarter decisions, you have to collect data and you have to know your baseline. And then in order to get where you want to go, you have to know where you are. And so we talk with a lot of our larger clients, and they're like, I want to be net zero by next year or 5 years. And we ask them, where are you at today? And they have no clue. So we want to help them. We want to educate them. We want to get them to a baseline of understanding and knowing where's the first step going to be before we get to where they want to go. So there's two really transitions that we see today in the buildings market. When we see you don't really see in the Midwest a lot of high rises being built right now. And actually, if you look at some of the vertical construction markets going into 2024, we're going to hit a low. So a lot of our construction teams are going to be focusing on long-term services. Some of our engineering partners, even here in the room and some around my, are going to be focusing on retrofits or modernizations. They're going to be looking at low budget, fast returns, and really trying to help their clients understand that that new part of the building or the new extension of the building is going to be happening not next year, but maybe in the next 4 or 5 years, and how we can help design that accurately, and how do we get them a building that they're proud of and that is going to be a higher return on investment instead of just trying to knock it out and get it done. So there's two terms we hear about today. One is digitalization, which is different than digitization. So to digitize something is to take it in its raw natural form and put it into a scan or put it into the computer, get it into its raw data. But what we're talking about in digitalization is we're taking that raw data, we're taking that now digitized information, and we're trying to change it into a service and a production that which the owner can be knowledge, can make better decisions, and can understand how is this building living and breathing. I don't know if it was kind of a weird concept that I understood early on, was that the buildings that we're in, and the way we live, we are inside 90% of the time of our entire life. Joseph Allen said that in his book, Healthy Buildings. And if you think about it, you move from your car to inside a building to get back into your car to get inside another building. And so we live 90% of our lives in buildings. And so when we're in buildings, how is it being well ventilated? What kind of construction materials is inside there? And so we don't really necessarily think about it all the time, but it's important. And so we don't know what's in a building unless we kind of abstract that raw data into something we can consume. So to give you a little idea of where the digitalization is growing, every person on the globe averages about 3.6 connected products. I see a couple of like smartwatches on. You got any type of AirPods. You got an Alexa at home. There's 3 right there, right? And so now people actually have connected devices in their refrigerator, telling them, they got a camera in there to see, is it empty? And so we know that these connected products are not just something that's innovative and cool to do, but we're actually utilizing them to make our life easier and making our life better. And so we want to do that on a large scale of our buildings. The second is big data. And so historically, what we've done in large buildings is we've had silo systems. You've had a security system, you've had a building automation system, which is for the HVAC, you've had a CCTV camera system, you've had maybe a remote monitoring environmental monitoring system. And so there's siloed systems that aren't controlled or viewed all at the same time. And so what we're talking about is normalizing, putting it all together on a common infrastructure and helping the building owner, the property manager, the investor and stakeholder understand what's happening on the whole building instead of just one of those silos. So if you think about it too, a building's kind of like a body, right? And so if you're inside the building, it's kind of like the lungs. What's coming into the air? What's coming into the building's inside to be able to affect everybody else that's here? And so if something's happening at one part of the building or one part, yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. If one part of the building is being affected, if there's a fire on the west side of the building and it's not notifying the other part of the building, that's a bad thing, right? And if you have a broken leg and you keep running and your body's not responding to the broken leg, it's affecting other parts of your body. And so we want to make sure that the whole building is being collected to understand how big this data really is and how we can make impact. The final digitalization is recognizing there is a product, a growth on a buildings and a business's revenue on an annual basis. Well, we just talked about risk before, right? Building owners and property managers want innovation. They want some of the things that are being pushed by the federal government and moving towards sustainability, net zero carbon goals. But because they don't know how to do it, there's a huge risk that comes when they take a leap of trusting the movement forward. And so what we have been seeing recently, this was done in the Forbes in 2023 article, that between 2022 and 2026, they were predicting of an annual growth of 27% for businesses when they invest in AI or analytics to help their data come in and help them make decisions. And I know we just had a huge session on AI. And again, I think just to support that view, AIs were created by smart engineers, and I think AIs are going to be a tool, or even analytics are going to be a tool to help us, because AI isn't creative. And AI doesn't have dreams or doesn't have ambition or doesn't have the ideas of what could be capable. An AI is really designed on a railroad track, right? And it's not going to get off and move to another area unless it's told to do so. And so that's where we want to move. We want to use it as a tool to move us to the next area of the world, which is electrification. And so when we look at electrification, that's another big push that's going around, is EV charging, is getting off the grid and using renewable resources like solar, wind, water. Geothermal is another big renewable resource. And so what we see here is that 50% by 2050, 50% of all our utilities is going to be drifted towards either solar or wind. I don't know if you are on Facebook, you see ads about solar installations and federal buybacks and helping you get that installed. That's a big push, especially when you look at California and you look at New York. There's a lot of big pushes towards that as well to help you be able to finance that. By 2040, Progressive says that by 2040, almost all of auto car sales will be EV. If you look at Ford, the Lightning truck, and you look at just Tesla starting that kind of market, by 2040, which is not going to be that too far away. I know we're in 2023, but it's going to seem like tomorrow where 2024 is going to come into play. Almost all car sales are going to be EV. And even now, when we look at when I was in St. Louis, even mandates about getting retrofitted buildings and parking lots EV ready, because they're anticipating to have so many parking spaces be EV ready, and then that's just going to grow. And so where's that electricity going to come from? If it's going to come from the grid, we have a problem, because we're going to have brownouts, we're going to have collapses because we only have so many finite electrons that are going to be created to be able to support more electrification. So that's where renewables come in. And how do you know how much to have in renewables if you're not tracking that data of how much you're already spending in your building? This is why it builds upon top of each other. And so when we look at buildings, it's interesting because our buildings today, all around the U.S., by 2050, they're still going to be here. About 90% of all the buildings that we have by 2050 are still going to be here today. And if you think about all the new construction that has happened, a lot of it's been tear down and build-ups. They're just kind of reusing the plot, reusing the land that they're already on to build new infrastructures. And so with that being said, the 40% of all of our global greenhouse emissions of our CO2 from natural fuels are being used by buildings globally. And so once again, we're going to have to rethink this if we're going to go towards electric. Again, when you look at some of our buildings, you're going to look at from by 2029, 1.34 trillion square feet are going to be because of buildings globally. That's a lot of square feet. Most buildings have a 30 plus year building life. Some of them, there's some other statistics that are saying over 60. That's depending on what when it was built, right? I think about cars, right? You can see, you think about cars of how they were built. I had a 1989 Crown Victoria was my first car. It was all steel, right? And it felt that thing could last forever. But then now we kind of get newer vehicles and it kind of just falls apart within maybe a couple of years. I mean, so it's built differently, right? So we're averaging buildings being around 30 plus year building life. And then you think about how we're heating and cooling this building, right? Every time that door opens, that large door opens, it's letting out conditioned air, conditioned space. If you think about shopping centers, you think about hospitals, doors constantly being opening and closing. You think about all of the wasted energy that's happening, not just from the doors, but also just through the little seams and cracks when you're trying to pressurize a building. And so what we see here is that 40% of CO2 emissions are coming from, again, the building, but also 30% of our energy that we're trying to create to sustain this building is being wasted. The way I share that too is I have a 10-month-old baby and two others at home who are older, and 8 and 6. But when my 10-month was born, we're up at the maternity wing, and there's 50 rooms, and it was my wife and I and our baby, and then we had one other family next to us. So out of 50 rooms, 2 of them were being occupied. And so I decided at 2 a.m. to go walk around my new baby and at 2 in the morning give my wife a rest. And as I pushed, all 48 rooms that were empty had the door open, the AC blowing cold, and the lights on. And I thought to myself, and again, this is a weird thing right after you have a baby, but this is the kind of industry I'm in. I'm like, what kind of wasted energy is this? You know, the doors are wide open, air's blowing, and that's the number one complaint in hospitals is that it's too cold, right? And so you're reheating cold air. Well, the reason is why they're blowing that constant volume air is to keep not letting the dirty, sick air sit. So they constantly have to have this air movement, and they got to bring outside fresh air. And so they just have the doors open, and so it's creating this wasted energy effect. And so how could we do that better? Again, on the hospital example here, we have in a normal hospital, 71.8% of all of its energy use in a hospital is done because of the mechanical services that's happening in that building. And when you break it down, the electricity that's being used is almost half. It's 48.74%, but fossil fuels is 53.33%, with 40% of that 53 being reheat. It's just reheating the building. It's just making it warm again. And it seems like a redundant thing, right? It just seems like it's like an oxymoron. And just we're creating ourselves our own grave, digging our own hole to throw money down the toilet. And so we could be doing better. When we look at overall building costs, this is another thing I talked with our partners about. And just caveat here is that when we talk with our partners who talk to their customers, this is a mindset change. I think that's kind of a lot of us when we're talking here in these sessions, it's creating a different thought and a mindset. But traditionally speaking, when we develop a building or we're trying to create a building, that process is about 3 to 5 years. From the start of thought to getting it up and running and to getting it in the building, that could be about 3 to 5 years average. But we're talking about getting something done quickly into creating a low-cost fit for running the operating expenditures for 25 or 30 years as the building, the lifelong part of the building. So you're talking about a 25-75 flip, but you're not thinking about how is this going to impact you for 75% of your life. And so we try to help our customers and help our partners realize that they may be exchanging something for low cost in the short term, but wasting the efficiencies and wasting the long-lasting impact moving forward. And so when we look at a building, we look at a big high-rise, we look at a hospital, we look at a school district, we looked at all of these other industries, all these different vertical markets. The IT software infrastructure and the way we look at IT, that's just a 3 to 5 year change, right? Anybody got an iPhone? You know it's less than 3 years you're going to be changing a different iPhone, right? Because their firmware is going to last up to a certain point, and then they're going to force you to get a new iPhone, right? You look at Windows. Windows is going to cap you maybe 5 years until you have to move to the next Windows upgrade, and then by then your hardware is already too old that they say you have to replace the whole thing. Right, so we take this under cost considerations. IT directors know this, and they put it in their budgets, and they try to figure how much it's going to cost them to replace all of this type of IT equipment. You look at the clinical technologies of a hospital. You look at the MRI machines. You look at all the different types of medical equipment that's out there. That can last anywhere between 1.5 to 5 years, depending on how well it's being cared for, and it's PM, it's preventative maintenance, taking care of all that. But when we look at a building, we're looking at this point. Just had a conversation, one of our partners here, Henderson Engineers, and we had a really good conversation about the siloed effect that we just talked about how common core infrastructure on a building, so the fiber cable, the switches, and to where all the building, all the other PoE lighting that can be just integrated to a Cat6 cable into the same switch to control. You could have everything plugged and ready to go to be interconnected to share the common core infrastructure. And one of the ways I shared this recently was because my wife and I are trying to build an extension on our patio. And I was talking to her, I was like, it'd be really cool. Right now we have a propane tank fire pit. And it annoys me that I have to go to Lowe's and have to go exchange that propane tank whenever it's just not the right time, right? It's like right beginning of a party in the evening or on Halloween, and then it just goes dead and I can't change it out. I said, it'd be really cool if we had a built-in fire pit and I can run a line from my natural gas furnace, to that to just tap off into that. When I started thinking about it, it's like what we're talking about here is if I told my wife, like, yeah, I'm going to call up the Spire service people and I'm going to ask them to run a new line all the way from all the way to the meter, all the way to the house. They're going to give me a price that's going to be pretty, extreme. When I could just say tap off to the nearest part of that pipe and run a short line right to where I want to go. And why is that cheaper? Is because I'm using less materials, because I'm using it to the closest part of where I'm trying to connect to that new device or that new fireplace, and I'm not creating a whole new road. I'm sharing the same infrastructure, if you will. And so when we look at buildings, a lot of our technology that we create, we're just like run it back to where it's in the data center when we can go to the nearest switch and share that data, and it'd be a short-term impact, a short-term cost with a long-term ROI and a long-term service. And so we have to think about these things differently, because in the construction market, if anybody here in the room have ever handled any type of bid process, any kind of construction bid process? No, it's not fun. Okay, it's convoluted. It's political, right? You got people hiding their numbers. You have people who are competing against one another. They'll lowball each other to buy a project. It's not a fun process. And I'm a people pleaser, so that's not fun for me. And so one of the things we try to help our partners understand is there's really an apples to apples comparison when you get to a construction project. Unless our engineers, unless some of our specifiers really call this out, and it's in plain English for everyone to understand, you'll have contractor A and B doing something completely different that's going to go outside the scope of what the customer really needs. And we have wasted costs, and we have wasted materials, and we have wasted everything when we could be sharing the same resources. So it's good all the way around when we tie it back to a centralized system. So again, when we work with our engineers, when we work with our contractors, when we look at buildings, we have to ask ourselves, like, who are we trying to reach? What are their problems? So one of the things we do is we talk about building owners and corporations, property managers, people who own the stakeholder of the building, who's trying to utilize it and who's trying to maybe lease it out. Well, number one we see here is the ability to attract and retain tenants and employees. Now, the reason why that's one of the problems is because we're post-COVID. A lot of corporations went to the hybrid model post-COVID. So there's some working from home while also working in-house. Pre-COVID, you had a lot of cubicle space, a lot of square footage space, and then you had a lot of personalized offices. Now moving to after COVID, post-COVID, we're seeing a lot more hot desking become available. We're seeing a lot less personalized office spaces and working hybrid and being able to go say, today I'm going to work in the office because I have a such meeting. I'm going to reserve this hot desk that's going to be my desk for the day. But my normal day-to-day is going to be at home where I'm most comfortable, and that's where all of my materials are. So it's a different mind shift change. And so when we think about building owners and corporations, building owners, number one, is how am I going to be attractive enough to get tenants to come lease my space? That's the first question. When we're talking about corporations, they're going to say, how can I be more attractive for my workers to come to the building that I've paid for them to come work at? Right? And so not only that, but we're also talking about healthy spaces. So we're talking about, safe spaces of IAQ. We're talking about, how does it work from an industry standpoint? And then when we talk about our engineering and design firm friends, I could just tell you this. I do a lot of lunch and learns because it's the only time I can really get in their face because they charge the time. That's how they make their business. Their time is very valuable. And so whenever they look at their time and it has to be chargeable, they're also looking at any type of risk on a project, any type of risk going into a product or a construction worker or a bid process. They need to mitigate as much risk as possible to be profitable and to know that they have trust within their inner circle of the project that they're going to do what they have created. It's going to be done. It's going to be done rightly. And so they have to manage the risk, and also they have to develop and design around resiliency. Resiliency means be able to have it to where if there's a failure, a possible failure, there's either an immediate or quick rebound to get back to normal. Okay. So an example of that is that if you had a failure in a building, like a large chiller, that's a cooling chiller, is that if that chiller 1 fails, chiller 2 is going to kick on to recover while you fix chiller 1 in the process. So you have a bounce back. You have to think about these things when it comes to critical infrastructures or hospitals or pharmacy, because you can't have it go down. Data centers have to be very, very resilient because you can't have a data center go down, because then if Amazon loses a data center, there's a certain market of people who are going to be very upset. They can't get to their shopping cart. They can't get to what they need to buy. And so that data center needs to stay up and running. The third thing is for, again, the facility managers to help create for their building owners and corporations to have a sustainable and healthy building, to have people who do come back. How healthy is it? And how are they managing that space? How are they being pushed by their CFOs or COOs or CEOs? And they're saying, look, we need to be a sustainable company. Well, how are we going to do that? The facility manager needs to create an ESG program and be able to say, this is how we're going to function as a building organization, and we need to follow suit. A lot of bigger corporations who have multiple facilities, like an accounting firm, and they have, like an accounting group, and they have a facilities group, and then they have, an executive group, and they have maybe a data center group. And so in a building, traditionally what happens is you get your utility rates. Someone somewhere made the agreement, you're 10% of that utility rate, you're 50%, you're 40%. And they just picked a number out of the air of what they felt like was the utilization for that group. And usually when you try to get people to go together, if there's not buy-in, there's going to be resistance. There's going to be thoughts that, that, hey, this is never going to work. And so what we found is that through the facility managers trying to get integrated into their utility rates, like their power metering, they can say, okay, we can break off this by floor or by zone. The accounting group, you were getting charged 10% of the utility rate. Now you're getting charged 40% because of the way that you're running your HVAC and you're running your lighting system. Whoa, wait a minute, 40%? No, we got to change something different. Now we have buy-in. Now we have pain. Now we have to be able to come together as a team to move forward. And so now we have the whole group moving together to try to have a sustainable way of operating the building. This is just a little funny perception. I don't know if you've ever had this conversation with other people, but like the way the customer explains their project or their process of what they want to do, that's kind of how they explain it. How the leader understood where we're going, how the analyst designed it, how the programmer programmed it, that's never going to work that way. How the consultant described it, I can tell you, my wife tells me I can sell snow to an Eskimo, right? I can sell snow to an Eskimo. So that one's, I understand that one. How the project was documented. How funny is that? There's nothing there. We how we're going to document our process. What operations installed, how the customer was billed. It's like a roller coaster ride, right? It's low, it's high, this bill comes here, this bill comes here. What does it really mean? How it was supported, but what would they really needed in the first place? And so if you think about it from how they explained it to where they really needed to be, you know what I call that? To get from there to here, that's a highly intelligent consultant. It's a highly intelligent consultant who can listen for what their needs are, skip all this process, and just give them what they really wanted to get them where they really needed to be. Because what I share with our engineering partners is I share with them a lot of what ifs, like what is possible. And a lot of times they're teaching me what's possible because I don't even know what's out there half of the time. But I have a few of them who are smaller, who are more localized, and I share with them about what's possible in the building and what are some of the risk the owner may take up front, but what kind of buyback they would get towards their community, towards their employees, towards their people who are leasing, and what's possible. And they say, well, my customer's not asking for that. My response to them is, do they know it's on the menu? We never truly understand what's possible unless someone shares with us what is. And so when we get to the point of being an integrated building, when we look at what used to be, when I go back to this traditional model, you have an elevator system, you have a video system, a lighting system, access control system, an energy management system, a visitor management system. This is a hospital example. But all these different softwares, different computers, different licenses, all that are just doing their own thing. But to steal a biblical analogy, the hand doesn't know what the foot is doing. Okay? So they're both running, but they don't know how they're affecting each other. And so what we're talking about is no integration, no communication, no control, higher operating costs, less energy efficient, and security vulnerabilities. Now, if you showed this to a CEO or an owner or even a tenant, would they really want this type of system? They think they do because they see the difference in the dollars. And we were just talking at Henderson about, educating the customer. The customer, and depending on who your customer is, that could be a different part of that C-suite. It could be a different part of the leadership. But how do you know what they really want until you understand their pain, until you understand their mission and their goals? Traditionally, we said, hey, here's some things we're going to do. Here are some things we're going to put into the system. Here we're going to put into a building. This is how you operate it, and we walk away. We're trying to change the model of finding out with the owners and those who are involved with the buildings process, what is your mission? What is your mission, and then what can we put into the building to help your mission grow and help sustain you? Because the word for 2023 in Schneider is scalable. We want to start small with you, and we want to grow with you. We don't want to just throw a whole bunch of money at a building just to see what is possible. We want to help you use these tools to make you and your tenants and your customers more comfortable and available. So we have 4 foundations of a smart building that we share. The first one is sustainable. Basically, what we're trying to do is reduce the whole life of the carbon footprint of our technology so that it makes sense to let the core of the building be as efficient as possible. Resilience, to have future-proof the design. I don't like that word future-proof, actually. I say future-ready. We want to grow with the building. We want to grow with the overall plan of how a campus will grow. Future-proofing means that we can see into the future and provide a proof for that and for what we're going to run into. We don't know what the future is going to hold, but we want to be future-ready to make the design adapt to the new needs of the owner. Hyper efficient is to make our costs for the building's performance so minimal that they're able to focus on what really matters and not focus on just how the building's running and what is it going to cost them moving forward. And finally is people-centric, creating an environment of a workspace or even a patient lab or a pharmacy where people want to be attracted to come to work. I think that's the whole Google, Apple mindset. When you talk about smart building, that's what they think. They think of the hot desking model. They think of flexibility. They think of how they can just go work, sleep, and play in an environment where it's comfortable and it moves and builds with them. They can use the building. They can use their environment for their specific needs. I think even just something like this, when I met Kevin, he was telling me about this buildings process, how you could just come here, you can work here, you can grow here, you can have networking here, you can do whatever you want here. That's a place where you want to be because it's not restrictive on your growth. It's not restrictive of what you're trying to accomplish. And so when we look at all vertical markets, we're trying to change that mindset. I think we already went over this one. Building certification, I'm not going to go too much into this, but we do support our design engineers to make a building certified in specific markets. In our 4 pillars, there's different models. These are all different building certifications you can focus on. They're basically a tool to help you get where you want to go, and that's really what they are. You may have heard of LEED and WELL and FitWell. WELL certification is about the health and IAQ of a building. You have LEED, which is a high efficiency, kind of depending on what platinum, gold certified you want to go towards. It's also having to deal with the building materials that's in those. So there are tools for engineering firms and to construction workers and building owners to understand there are ways to make you move into this platform, move into a smart category, and there's ways and tools and resources to help you get there. As an example, this WELL certification, these are some of the areas they focus on. So you talk about air, you talk about water, nourishment, light, movement, thermal comfort, sounds, materials, mind, and community. Every single one of these, there's points associated with them. And technology covers all the ones that are highlighted. That's how much technology is involved into managing and addressing how to make a well building. And you have to collect that data and control that data and control your environment in order to make that happen. And when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about collecting that data and putting it into an easy to read and understandable dashboard for building owners. So if you look at a CFO who's looking at the energy aspect, they may just want to see how much energy they're using in comparative to last month, to last year, or maybe if they have a multi-building aspect, how is building 1 compared to building 2? And so that's all they want to see. They don't care about the actual faults or issues that are going on. That could be for a COO, an operations manager, or a facility manager who wants to say, hey, I want to know when there's a problem in my building. They may be able to see some other type of work order reports or some other type of customized dashboard. Resiliency, that's that cybersecurity aspect. Big buzzword, cybersecurity. I don't know if you've heard about, just kind of giving you a brief history. Anybody remember the Target hack about 2015? It came through a building automation system into a POC system on a VLAN. And so they lost about, I believe the number was like $13.5 million that was robbed from their customers that they had to pay back. But it wasn't even that harmed them. It was the $520 million pitfalls of stocks that people stopped investing into Target after that happened. Now, they've bounced back, right? The people are still shopping at Target, and people still go to their stores and shop online. But not a lot of businesses can do that. And when you even think about getting involved in type of technology such as IP infrastructures, and you're talking about connectability within the IPv7 and all that kind of integration, that's a if you don't know what you're doing right, you could have a open firewall or open system that can make a customer very uncomfortable, like a bank or a pharmacy or a life sciences. That's going to make them uncomfortable. So we have to be very resilient and very cyber secure and cyber aware. And so at Schneider, we have the highest levels of standards that our industry carries to make cybersecurity a major impact. Hyper efficient. This is kind of the cool stuff that we've talked about in the first session about AI, but what we call as a digital twin. Has anybody heard of the term digital twin before? Probably a few of you. So what we're talking about, if you the funniest way I've ever heard about a digital twin is from my colleague Alexi. Yeah, he says that a digital twin is basically like Star Wars. If you remember the Star Wars where they had the big ship and it was on like a hologram, and they went in, it was like the digital map, and then they zoomed in into the enemy's ship, and then they show where there's a duct where the missile had to go to be destroyed. In a way, that's what we're trying to do within our digital space, is to say, hey, here's a building. Here's the piping, here's the ductwork, here's the sensors, and we have a digital representation of how the building is living and breathing to understand the environment. When you go to the doctor and they put on EKG monitors, they're trying to understand in a digital form how your heart is operating. When they take scans, they're trying to take a digital representation of what's going on inside your head or inside your chest. And so what we're trying to do is connect all these pieces to say, here's how my building is operating and running, and we're creating a digital twin of that. And so through that, we can create diagnostic forms and reports for our customers to help them say, hey, instead of being preventative or even responding in an emergency standpoint, we can now predict when there could be an emergency failure happening on a customer site. A couple of examples is this. If you had ever had like a heart surgery or an open surgery at a surgery center here, what would you rather have? Would you rather have your doctor say, hey, look, we talked to operations. They're looking at some of the numbers on the rooftop unit that serves that surgical suite, and they're not satisfied. They're afraid that they're going to have a really serious issue to where the HVAC unit could go down during your open heart surgery. We're going to move it to a different part, or we're just going to reschedule you altogether. Now, would you rather hear that or hear, hey, during your surgery, the HVAC unit went out and the lights went off and it was really bad. We didn't know if you were going to make it out of there. Like, everyone was sweating. You may get an infection because we were sweating in there, and there's nothing we could do. Like, that's a bad situation, right? You don't want to hear that. And so some of our commercial properties are utilizing these analytics to look at temperatures and flows and humidity and all this. And they're basically saying, hey, you, Mr. and Mrs. Renter who's in my space, you can you can pay for a 20% premium, and you'll never have to be uncomfortable in your space ever again. We will let you know when we have a problem in our building. You will never have to call in a work order and let us know that there's something wrong. A lot of people would pay extra for that, to have higher satisfaction within their customers or in their employees, to know that they don't ever have to be uncomfortable, or they never have to worry about if they have a indoor air quality issue and sickness is being passed around because they're having a good mediation and filtration system and UV system to cleanse their environment. So we can utilize all that data to make better decisions. People-centric is that connected room solution. This is where I give an example of hospital patient room. We actually have a live lab. It's in O'Fallon, Missouri, which is just a little west of St. Louis. And we have a site there where we take our clients through, where there's a mock-up of the future of the hospital room. And one of the things we show is how we want to make the patient room experience very personal and very interactive. Shout out, what's the number one thing that you feel like you lose in a hospital? Control, number one thing, right? You go in, you have someone telling you where to go, how long you can be there, what to eat, what to do. I mean, it's just, you lose all control. Your thermostat only controls to a certain amount, or maybe it's always hot or always cold. Your blinds have to be opened and closed by somebody else if you can't get out of bed. You're only allowed to eat certain food. I mean, it's just a very controlled environment for your health and safety. But the number one thing that hospitals really rely upon is that patient satisfaction. If anybody has been to a hospital and you got a text message or an email said, "How was your stay at our hospital? Please rate us." That's important because the insurance companies of hospitals actually get a rebate back when they have higher satisfaction scores, so that way they can spend that money on further projects. And so those are very important to them. And so what we talk about, again, that pain statement for our clients and customers, is that I give an example of a patient room that has a sensor that can sense the humidity, sense the environment, has motorized blinds, has a TV that is able to be connected to the Internet of Things, being the integration piece. And what if you had a microphone in your bedside pillow that was put for a newly amputee person? Someone who just got into an accident, or maybe it's a war veteran. They just were nearly amputee. So not only just you lost control, but now your life is completely changed. How can you give them something of satisfaction, to help heal that process better? You can put an Alexa device, and it doesn't have to be something that's connected to Amazon or even call it Alexa. It could be Sophia. It can be any kind of name you really want to create it to be. But you would say, Sophia, open my blinds. And it would open. You wouldn't have to wait to do a nurse call. You didn't have to wait for anybody to come in the room to help you. If you're uncomfortable, Sophia turns the thermostat to 68. Done. Sophia, turn the channel to channel 5. Done. You now have control. What you just lost, and now you've given the patient something back that their life can be a little bit back to normal. Not 100%, but at least the healing process would be better emotionally and psychologically. And so we try to tell that it's all about the person interaction. I mean, this is just a hardware. This is software, right? And I'm not in the business of making hardware and software for buildings because it's just a really neat thing to do. Those are the kind of stories and the type of innovations I care about, is the people. And so that's what we want to try to focus on. Let's see how much time I have left here. I think I'm doing pretty good, right? Okay. So just an example of a day in the life of an office, future of the office. If you pull into the parking lot, it has a camera that takes your license plate and says, yeah, you're supposed to be here. You scan your card. And the building was all turned off until you were ready to get into the building, and the building says, oh, you're on floor 3. I'm not going to turn the whole building on, the lights on and everything. I'm just going to turn floor 3 on because that's where I know you're going. That's the only time I need to be on. So you get in, the access control system tags you and knows that you're supposed to be here. Maybe you have an EV charger and it goes to your app and says, hey, you're charging your EV charging car, and now you're up to full, and now we can be able to let you know and notify you when it's full, so that way you can move it to a new spot so somebody else can come in. Maybe you have a guest who's coming to see you instead of a receptionist. Maybe the receptionist is busy. Maybe you just have an interactive video wall that says, oh, I'm going to conference room 101. It sends you a Google Maps link or a QR code to go to Google Maps to take you to room 101. So that way you can just take yourself. In the environment of living in the building, you can have an app that controls your personalized space. So you can turn the thermostat up or down. You can schedule a conference room. You can schedule your own hot desking that we talked about before. We have a 6-in-1 sensor that can sense humidity, COVs, temperature. But what we also do is people counting. And so what that is 2 different facets. Number one is that we can count how many people in the room, because there are codes that's related to fresh air intake. And so traditionally you put a CO2 sensor on the wall. When it hits to a threshold, then we open the outdoor air damper and it brings in fresh air. Well, that means we have to wait for the CO2 to come in the building. And there's a lot of studies done in a book called Healthy Buildings by Joseph Allen. It's a really great book. He talks about how CO2 makes you sleepy. If you've ever been sleepy in a car, and you've been driving for a long time, and you have the indoor fan going in your car and you feel sleepy, roll down your windows. It's because that CO2 is stuck in your car and you're feeling a little tired. You bring in some fresh air, it'll liven you up a little bit. And so in this space, in a building like this, where it's very large, where there's a lot of movement here, instead of waiting for CO2 to get to a certain threshold, we can actually count to say, oh, how many people in here? I can now control the outdoor environment to bring in the enough air that I just need for this much people. And then whenever people start dissipating and leaving, we save on that efficiency and save on that energy savings. So we're able to control that, as well as say, organizing and scheduling conference rooms and hot desking. It's not a camera. It doesn't look at you. It's just looking at your thermal image. Then we can take that data and look at from a online building automation system, or even some of those analytic features. And then we're able to take in the energy monitoring. And then at the end of the day, when the last person leaves, that's when we shut down the building fully. Not when it's, more in the middle of the day, not when the last person leaves, the lights are still on. I don't know if you ever drove through 270 southbound at night. I've driven that sometimes from the airport, and you just see the buildings at night, the floors that the lights are still on, that it looks like nobody's there. And so we could save on energy and the grid with that. So a couple of examples we can give here is, we understand as Schneider, we're not trying to move the needle in a month to 6 months in a short amount of time. What we're trying to understand and help our partners and owners and design firms understand is that there is a process in the planning of a contract, in the planning of a building stage, where the cost goes up. Okay, during the process of the construction process. And so usually when you get here to the construction stage, the cost of change is what we call change orders. When someone makes a last minute decision or we need to add something else, the cost goes up and the effort goes up, and then we go outside of budget. The traditional process of when we go here, it happens right here in the construction documents for our design firms. This is where a majority of our energy and effort comes from their side of things. And when we're talking about a design assist, is we're trying to find partnerships with partners who want to have the conversation here where we can change after we can make that threshold where we can make a really impact change before it gets really cost effective for the budget and it hits the customer really hard. And so we want to be brought in early. Instead of brought in here, we want to be brought in here to understand, let's have some good conversations. Let's show them what's on the menu. Let's show some of the pitfalls and the risks, and how do we help move that pendulum forward. So a couple examples. There's a hospital called the Pavilion at Penn Medicine in Pennsylvania. This is the first all-integrated hospital in the U.S. And so what they did was they utilized Schneider Electric as a low-voltage integrator consultant, and then they used us to be able to find technologies that are current and also those that are going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, because when those technologies got implemented, they were going to be that long. And so they didn't want it to be like, oh, we're buying new technology today that when we put it in the building, it's going to be old technology tomorrow, like we talked about. So we worked as a master systems integrator in a integrated project. And the overall square footage of the hospital was 1.5 million. And they moved patients in there in 2021. And we're looking at the next 2 years. We're looking at the data for the ROI for the last 2 years of how that impacted their satisfaction scores, their energy efficiency scores, and how we're able to help them in their plans. It was a 500 patient room with 47 operating rooms, over 1,000 miles of networking cable that was shared amongst the building, as well as having 17 stories in this building. Another one in the East Coast was the United Therapeutics Net Zero building. This was a really interesting building. We were brought on to. And Net Zero means they basically take no energy from the community and from the substations and everything else. They basically are self-sufficient. And so they utilize solar PV arrays. They used IP lighting control systems, a lot less energy coming from PoE lighting, and instead of pulling a 120 up to a light circuit. And so they're able to take low energy from there. They use electrochromatic glass tinting and geothermal systems to basically utilize the building's own heat signature from the sun rising to the sun setting, as well as using the earth to be able to control the amount of heat that was coming into the building. And they also utilized natural free ventilation, free cooling, and water-to-water heat pumps with chill beams. And so these were some of the mechanical designs and how we were utilizing this, as well as our building advisor, which is our analytics piece that says, hey, this is how it's running today. Tomorrow or next month, it's going to change because the building changes constantly, and we can make it better by tweaking this little aspect of it. We also worked on the 425 Park Avenue in New York. It's the first well-certified building, 47 stories, Class A office space. So they were able to be a well-certified indoor air quality building while charging a premium rate to their lease tenants. So that way they don't have to worry about ever feeling like they're in a sick building or that they're in a unwell ventilated building. They can come and be in a well-established environment. And so they're able to not only utilize our controls and our software to help them make decisions, but they also utilized our software plan-on to help them do that hot desking or scheduling to make it more efficient. If you think about it, the way the hot desking works, any of you been to a gym before? Okay. You've ever wanted to go work on a piece of gym equipment, but you have someone that's just sitting there looking on their phone, and you're like, when are you going to get up? Right? I need to use that machine. That's what we're talking about here, is that you've scheduled the right to sit at that seat and be able to have that as your environment. And so you were able to schedule in and schedule out your workspace instead of waiting for someone to get up, and then you could snag that seat when it's ready. And so high efficiency, high impact, so you can get your work done. So I hope that was pretty clear in the short amount of time that we've had together to talk about buildings, to talk about the environment, to talk about our goal at Schneider is not just about the parts and pieces, but we're actually trying to move the needle towards our culture and environment to make better decisions. And so I want to take an opportunity now to answer any questions, and then I think we have a moderator to kind of help with that. Okay.
With time running out, I'm going to
Yes.
moderate through here.
Thank you.
What I wanted to propose a question to you and see how you would handle it.
Yeah.
But one issue I've been a part of actually was at a hospital, and the water was cold.
Yeah.
So if say I'm
You saying like in a shower?
say I'm said hospital,
Yeah.
and in terms of sterilization and all the things that matter, that hot water and bacteria and all these things happen. It definitely was unsettling for me. Even when I was a young age, I just knew it's a little awkward. So if I was the hospital and I said, we have this problem, what would you implement with that problem to solve that, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Are you giving like the example of the water as just an example of a problem?
Yes, like a water heater, and not knowing when it's going to reach capacity to heat more water.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's a perfect area of when we're talking about efficiencies and keeping regulatory compliance in hospitals. So hospitals have to follow what's called Joint Commission, and it's a regulated group that comes and makes sure the hospitals are following up to code in every standard to its highest rating. And if they're not, they have to fix it. What we try to do in a technology industry is make accessible the type of data that they're wanting to get to make decisions. So like if you think about a hot water system, there could be a sensor that we could add to look at maybe the salt mixture in the tank, and to be able to say, hey, we're needing to have some, the salt levels are low, we need to add in some more salt. It could be a regulatory check. Instead of a guy or a girl walking to the hot water heater, walking to a boiler system and saying, okay, here's the gauge, here's the pressures, here's the numbers. I'm going to write it down to say I did it for Joint Commission, and then I'm going to put it in a binder and I'm going to walk away. When we have the technology available, they can tell us what those numbers and pressures and temperatures are, and then say, oh, by the way, something's wrong here. You need to take a look at it. And so while we talked about the AI concept, that's just a tool to catch something that we're preoccupied. I mean, a lot of workers, they're not trying to be evil or trying to do bad at their jobs. Sometimes they may just have something going on at home that they just overlooked at work. And so we're trying to use technology as a tool to help perfect our limited capability as people to make sure that we're doing better, if that makes sense. And so when you say, hey, I have a problem, that's in my view, you're helping them become aware of what they need to do to make things better, to be more aware so that you never knew there was an issue to begin with. And so we always have to be communicative, and it's always a conversation further is how can we move the direction and move the needle to where our patients, our customers are at the highest value. I hope that answered your question.
No, it 100% did. Thank you so much for your time, and I really want you to know that was extremely transferable.